The disgraced politician threw a punch at the royal guard, thinking it would make headlines, but one subtle move from the guard, and he ended up with his own nose broken. Want to know what really happened? First, hit that subscribe button and comment below where you're watching from. That being said, let's get into it. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Horse Guards Parade as tourists gathered for the ceremonial changing of the guard. The spring air carried a crisp brightness, perfect for the hundreds of visitors who lined the barriers, cameras ready to capture a slice of British tradition. At his post stood Guard Elliot Grimsby, his scarlet tunic a vibrant contrast against the weathered stone buildings that had witnessed centuries of similar ceremonies. At 32, Grimsby was no mere ceremonial figurehead. His uniform concealed scars from 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, reminders of a dedication that went far beyond the parade ground. The brass buttons of his tunic had been polished that morning for nearly an hour, each reflecting his commitment to the standards expected of the Queen's Guard. "Daddy, he's not moving at all," whispered a young girl to her father, her American accent carrying across the respectful hush that had fallen over the crowd. "Is he real?" The father smiled, explaining the discipline required to maintain such stillness. What he didn't know, what most visitors didn't realize, was that Guard Grimsby could hear every word, feel every gaze, yet remained as still as the statues adorning the nearby buildings. This wasn't merely a performance. It was military precision perfected through years of service. His bearskin cap added nearly 18 inches to his height, creating an imposing silhouette. Beneath that ceremonial exterior was a mind constantly assessing his surroundings, a habit formed in combat zones where lapses in attention could prove fatal. Even here in London, those instincts remained sharp. That morning, like every morning of his duty rotation, Grimsby had risen before dawn. The preparation ritual was sacred. Uniform inspection, equipment check, mental preparation. His commanding officer had once said, "You don't just wear this uniform, you live up to it." Grimsby took those words to heart. Each crease, each polish, each precise angle of his posture was a testament to something greater than himself. Most tourists saw only the ceremonial surface, the colourful uniform, the unwavering stance. They didn't see the man who had pulled wounded comrades from burning vehicles, who had made split-second decisions under enemy fire. To them, he was a photo opportunity. But to those who understood military bearing, Grimsby was a soldier first, ceremonial guard second. As he stood at attention, Grimsby's eyes remained fixed forward, focusing on a point in the distance, a technique that allowed his peripheral vision to monitor the parade ground while maintaining statuesque stillness. It was this awareness that first noticed the commotion at the edge of the crowd, where suited men with camera equipment were causing ripples of disturbance. The disturbance crystallized into a man whose face had been across newspapers for all the wrong reasons. Though Grimsby maintained his forward gaze, his peripheral vision caught the swagger of the disgraced politician approaching, with an entourage of assistants and cameramen following behind. 2 weeks ago, this man had been exposed for creating proposals for community centres and youth programmes that existed only on paper. The phantom projects had secured him votes and influence, particularly in struggling neighbourhoods where hopes had been raised and then dashed when journalists discovered that not a single brick had been laid despite millions in allocated funds. Now, with approval ratings plummeting and calls for resignation growing louder, the politician had emerged with a new strategy, positioning himself as a reformer, challenging wasteful excesses of traditional institutions. His expensive suit contrasted with his newly adopted man-of-the-people rhetoric, a disconnect apparent to everyone except himself. "Make sure you get this from multiple angles," he instructed one of his cameramen, voice deliberately louder than necessary. "The people deserve to see their institutions questioned." His London accent had been polished at expensive schools, then deliberately roughened again for political advantage. a linguistic chameleon adapting to whatever environment might benefit him most. Several tourists shifted uncomfortably, sensing the performative nature of the interruption. A middle-aged couple from Japan lowered their cameras respectfully and stepped back, while an elderly woman clutched her handbag tighter, her expression showing the particular British distaste for public disruption. The natural flow of visitors, which had been moving in a respectful circuit around the parade grounds, now developed an eddy of confusion around the politician's entourage. "Sir, if you could please maintain the viewing distance," began a young guide, approaching with careful deference. "I'm an elected representative," came the dismissive response, with a wave of a manicured hand. "I have every right to examine how taxpayer money is spent on—" His eyes flicked to Grimsby with disdain. "These displays." He positioned himself strategically for the camera against the backdrop of Grimsby's form. The cameraman adjusted position, giving a thumbs up to indicate he was recording. Grimsby remained motionless, his training providing a shield against the provocation. Behind his disciplined exterior, his mind assessed the situation with military precision. 8 years in the armed forces had taught him to recognize potential threats, and something in the politician's bearing triggered those instincts. "Ladies and gentlemen," the politician announced, turning to address the crowd while gesturing grandly toward Guard Grimsby, "what you're witnessing is the physical embodiment of Britain's refusal to enter the modern age." His voice carried the practiced cadence of campaign speeches, rising and falling with theatrical precision. Several tourists exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly transformed into an unwilling audience for political theatre. A family began to edge away, the father quietly telling his children, "That's quite enough of that. Let's see what's over here instead." While neighbourhoods across London struggle with real problems, we maintain these ceremonial relics, the politician continued, undeterred by the shifting crowd. "We're spending millions annually on pageantry rather than progress." The cameraman circled for a more dramatic angle, capturing the politician's gestures against Grimsby's motionless form. 2 aides distributed leaflets to reluctant onlookers, glossy paper featuring slogans about modernising Britain's priorities. "Look at this spectacle," he continued, stepping closer to Grimsby, violating the respectful distance maintained by others. Grown men, dressed like 19th century soldiers, standing still while actual veterans struggle for healthcare and housing. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on those who knew Grimsby's combat record, though the politician himself remained oblivious to the fact that he was insulting an actual veteran. A group of American tourists who had been eagerly photographing the guard now lowered their cameras, their expressions shifting from excitement to discomfort. Wouldn't these resources be better spent addressing knife crime, or improving schools, or actually building the community centres that communities desperately need? The politician's voice rose on this last point, a transparent attempt to reframe his own scandal as a budgetary concern, rather than corruption. Throughout this performance, Grimsby maintained perfect composure. His eyes remained fixed forward, his posture unchanged. The only indication of his awareness was a subtle shift in his breathing, controlling his respiratory rate to maintain alertness without betraying tension. "They stand here like robots, following protocols established centuries ago," the politician declared, stepping into the sightline of a young couple trying to take a photograph. "This blind devotion to outdated traditions is what's holding our nation back." The couple muttered apologies and moved away, finding their experience tainted by the intrusion. Others in the crowd began to disperse as well, creating a widening circle around the politician and his target. The natural ebb and flow of the tourist experience had been disrupted, replaced by a growing tension that was palpable in the spring air. "I ask you," the politician continued, playing to his camera rather than the increasingly unreceptive crowd, "in your own workplaces, would this be acceptable? Standing still, refusing to adapt, clinging to outdated methods while the world changes around you. He gestured dramatically at Grimsby's uniform. "These aren't the values of innovation and progress that will carry Britain forward." 20 minutes into his monologue, the politician's frustration began showing through his practiced facade. Most tourists had moved to other viewing areas, while those remaining watched with the uncomfortable fascination of witnesses to a car crash. His cameraman checked his watch, and even loyal aides exchanged glances, suggesting this wasn't generating the footage they'd hoped for. "Perhaps our ceremonial friend doesn't understand public accountability," he announced, moving closer to Grimsby. "When I speak, I represent citizens. Your silence represents what? Blind obedience to protocols established before democracy existed?" Grimsby's eyes remained fixed forward, not acknowledging the invasion of his space. Years of military discipline held firm, though his trained senses registered every movement. He had faced insurgents in Helmand Province. This theatrical performance barely registered as a threat, physically at least. This rigid adherence to outdated protocols. "This is exactly what's wrong with our institutions," the politician continued, his voice taking on a harder edge as he sensed his performance failing to generate the desired reaction. "Real public servants address real problems. They don't hide behind tradition and ceremonial dress-up." A small group of military veterans who had been quietly observing from the periphery moved slightly closer, their bearing indicating professional interest in how this situation would develop. One of them, a woman wearing a discreet service pin on her jacket, shook her head slightly at the politician's escalating rhetoric. "Let me tell you what real service looks like," the politician declared, his voice rising. "Real service means listening to constituents. It means adapting to changing needs. It means breaking through the facade of pointless tradition when it no longer serves the public interest." He was nearly shouting now, his carefully constructed image of reasonable reformer giving way to frustrated entitlement. His cameraman winced slightly at the change in tone. This wasn't the calm, authoritative challenge to tradition they had planned, but something increasingly desperate and personal. "But you can't respond, can you?" the politician taunted, moving in a deliberate circle around Grimsby. "You're trapped in this performative role, unable to defend these wasteful traditions because there is no defence. You're a walking anachronism, as relevant to modern Britain as horse-drawn carriages or telegrams." The remaining tourists had stopped pretending to sightsee, now openly watching the one-sided confrontation, with expressions ranging from embarrassment to concern. A palace security officer had appeared at the periphery, speaking quietly into his radio while assessing the situation. "I wonder," the politician said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quietness that signalled escalation rather than calming, "if beneath all this ceremonial nonsense there's actually a thinking person capable of engaging with reality. Or have you surrendered your identity so completely to this charade that there's nothing left?" He positioned himself directly in front of Grimsby now, deliberately blocking the guard's line of sight. A clear violation of protocol that even casual visitors understood was inappropriate. His cameraman adjusted position again, sensing that the confrontation was building towards something more dramatic. "This is what I'm fighting against," the politician announced, addressing his camera directly now, his back almost touching Grimsby's chest. "A system so rigid, so resistant to change, that it produces human props who can't even defend their own existence. This is why we need fresh thinking in government, why we need leaders willing to challenge the costly rituals that drain our resources while offering nothing of value to modern citizens." In the politician's mind, this confrontation had transformed from a calculated publicity stunt into something more personal. A desperate need to provoke a reaction, to break through Grimsby's disciplined composure, and thereby prove his point. What had begun as political theatre was morphing into something darker. The flailing of a drowning man, grabbing at anything that might keep him afloat. The politician's aide approached cautiously, checking his watch with a nervous gesture. "Sir, we should probably wrap this up. We have the meeting with the neighbourhood association in 40 minutes. The suggestion was met with a dismissive wave, as the politician's attention remained fixed on Grimsby's unwavering composure. "Look at him," the politician said, his voice carrying an edge of genuine frustration now. "Standing there, like history stopped a century ago. Meanwhile, people in my constituency can't afford heating. Tell me how this pageantry helps them." The remaining crowd had grown silent, the usual tourist chatter replaced by an uncomfortable tension. Even casual visitors could sense the invisible line being approached, the boundary between political commentary and personal harassment. Security personnel had begun to move closer, their casual positioning belying their heightened alertness. "Do you know what the difference is between us?" the politician asked, his face inches from Grimsby's, close enough that his breath fogged the brass buttons of the guard's tunic. "I actually serve the people. I respond to their needs. I don't just stand around like some puppet of the old guard, pretending the empire still exists." Something shifted in the politician's expression. A calculation, a decision. His next words emerged with deliberate provocation. "Maybe it's time. Someone showed what happens when outdated institutions meet the real world." He turned slightly toward his cameraman, ensuring the angle was optimal for what would come next. The assault happened with such suddenness that witnesses would later describe it differently. One moment, the politician was delivering his monologue. The next, his arm had drawn back and forward in a sharp motion. His fist connected with Grimsby's chest, making a dull thud against the scarlet tunic. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. A woman covered her young son's eyes, while an elderly man with military bearing half rose from his bench, his face darkening with anger. The politician's own aides froze in horror, the cameraman continuing to record even as his mouth opened in shock. Time seemed to compress in that moment. For Grimsby, the world narrowed to tactical assessment, a skill honed in combat situations where split-second decisions determined survival. The punch itself was amateur, poorly executed with more theatrical flourish than actual force, landing against his chest with minimal impact. Yet it represented something profound, a deliberate assault on not just his person, but on the institution and tradition he had sworn to represent. Protocol dictated specific responses to physical threats, a graduated series of actions designed to maintain security while using minimal necessary force. In the milliseconds following the impact, Grimsby's mind processed these options with combat-trained efficiency. This wasn't an armed insurgent or a genuine security threat. It was a desperate man performing for cameras. The politician's triumphant expression lasted only a fraction of a second before confusion replaced it. He had expected resistance, reaction, perhaps even satisfying footage of the guard breaking discipline to subdue him, which could be edited later to portray institutional overreach. Instead, Grimsby's eyes remained fixed forward, his posture perfect, absorbing the strike without visible reaction. "Is that all you've got?" the politician taunted, emboldened by the lack of immediate consequence. "No response? No defence of your precious traditions?" His voice had risen to a near shout, echoing across the parade ground. "This is what I mean! These figureheads can't even defend themselves, let alone justify their existence in modern Britain!" He drew his arm back for a second strike, his face flushed with entitlement and desperation. Security personnel began moving more quickly, but were still several seconds away. In that moment, Grimsby made his decision. Not as a ceremonial guard, but as a soldier trained to respond to assault with appropriate force. Grimsby's response came as combat-honed instinct refined through years of training. As the politician's arm swung a second time, Grimsby executed a textbook defensive maneuver. A subtle pivot and minimal deflection that redirected the force rather than opposing it directly. Physics did the rest. The politician's momentum carried him forward as his balance shifted. His face connected with Grimsby's shoulder, producing a crunch that echoed across the silent parade ground. Blood bloomed immediately, staining the politician's white shirt and tie with crimson streaks. He staggered backward, hands clutching his face, eyes wide with shock. The expensive suit, chosen for its photogenic qualities, now bore dramatic evidence of his miscalculation. "My nose! He broke my nose!" The politician's voice had lost all its practiced authority, rising to a nasal whine. "Did you get that on camera? Did you see what he did to me?" The cameraman had indeed captured everything, though not in the triumphant context originally planned. The footage showed with perfect clarity a guard maintaining position while being assaulted, followed by a minimal defensive adjustment that allowed natural consequences to unfold. Within seconds, security personnel converged from multiple directions, their movements precise and coordinated. Two officers positioned themselves between Grimsby and the politician, while others began clearing the immediate area of tourists, creating a professional perimeter around the situation. "Sir, you need to step back," the lead security officer addressed the politician firmly. "Medical assistance is on the way, but you need to move away from the ceremonial area immediately." Throughout this rapidly unfolding scene, Grimsby had returned to his original position with fluid precision. His eyes remained fixed forward, his posture perfect. The only evidence of the encounter was a small bloodstain on his shoulder where the politician's nose had made contact, a crimson badge that somehow enhanced rather than diminished the dignity of his uniform. "Are you seeing this?" the politician demanded of his cameraman, voice distorted by the injury and rising panic. "He attacked me! A public servant! This is assault!" Blood continued to drip between his fingers, spattering onto the cobblestones in a pattern that would remain long after the crowd had dispersed. One of the security officers, a former military man himself, leaned in slightly. "Sir, we have at least 30 witnesses, and your own camera footage showing you struck the guard twice. I strongly suggest you accept medical assistance and leave the premises without further incident." The politician's aides had finally unfrozen, rushing forward with handkerchiefs and attempts at damage control. "Let's get you to a doctor," one murmured urgently. "This isn't playing well," another whispered, gesturing subtly toward the crowd of witnesses with phones raised, recording everything. "I was making a point about institutional waste," the politician insisted, his voice increasingly desperate as blood continued to flow. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Violent response to legitimate questioning." A distinguished older gentleman in the crowd couldn't contain himself any longer. "Legitimate questioning doesn't involve throwing punches, young man," he observed dryly, his comment drawing murmurs of agreement from nearby onlookers. The security team worked with practiced efficiency, creating a pathway to escort the politician and his entourage away from the ceremonial area. As they moved, the contrast couldn't have been more stark. The politician dishevelled, bleeding, gesticulating wildly while trying to maintain his narrative of victimhood. Grimsby standing perfectly at attention, his discipline unbroken, embodying the very traditions of duty and restraint that his attacker had mocked. "This isn't over," the politician called back as his aides guided him toward the exit. "The public deserves to know how their taxes fund this kind of response to legitimate criticism." Yet even as he made this final attempt to control the narrative, phones throughout the crowd continued recording. Witnesses exchanged contact information, and the unedited reality of what had transpired was already spreading. In his desperate bid for attention, the politician had indeed created a viral moment, just not the one he had intended. As medics attended to the politician near the parade ground exit, security officials collected contact information from witnesses. The politician's cameraman found himself in an awkward position, repeatedly asked by authorities if they could review his footage. His hesitation was evident. The unedited video would definitively contradict his employer's version of events. "It was self-defense," a tourist from Bristol told an official, her phone clutched in her hand. That guard didn't move until he was hit twice, and even then, he just shifted. The politician practically threw his own face into the guard's shoulder. Similar accounts emerged from dozens of witnesses, creating a consistent narrative. The politician's aides huddled in urgent conversation, expressions growing grim as they scrolled through their phones, watching reports of the incident spread rapidly. "We need to get ahead of this," one aide insisted, voice low but intense. "Release a statement about excessive force. Talk about how he was just trying to highlight wasteful tradition when he was violently—" "Did you actually see what happened?" interrupted another aide, glancing toward the gathering of witnesses. "We can't push that narrative when there's dozens of videos showing him throwing the first punch. And the second." The politician himself sat on a bench, holding an ice pack to his rapidly swelling nose, his earlier bravado replaced by stunned calculation as he began to realize the magnitude of his miscalculation. Blood had dried on his collar and tie, transforming his camera-ready appearance into something that would communicate vulnerability rather than strength in any footage. "Get me out of here," he muttered to his chief of staff, "and find me the best PR consultant in London, not tomorrow, tonight." As the politician's entourage escorted him to a waiting car, a police officer approached. "Sir, we'll need a statement from you regarding the incident. There are multiple allegations of assault against a serviceman on duty." The politician's face, what was visible of it above the ice pack, drained of remaining colour. "Assault? That's absurd. I was conducting a legitimate protest against wasteful—" "Sir," the officer interrupted calmly, "we have video evidence from multiple sources, including your own cameraman. Would you like to give your statement here, or would you prefer to continue this conversation at the station after seeking medical attention?" Meanwhile, across the parade ground, the ceremony continued with restored dignity. A senior officer had approached Grimsby briefly, exchanging a few quiet words before returning to his position. For visitors who arrived after the incident, there was no indication that anything unusual had occurred. Only a single guard standing at his post with characteristic perfect stillness. Yet for those who had witnessed the confrontation, Grimsby's continued performance of duty carried new depth and meaning. Children who had earlier giggled at the guard's famous immobility now watched with genuine respect. Parents who might have encouraged playful attempts to make the guards smile instead explained in hushed tones about dedication and discipline. "Dad, did that man really hit the guard?" asked a young boy who had witnessed the incident. "He did," his father confirmed quietly. "And notice how the guard handled it. No more force than necessary, straight back to his duty afterward. That's what real strength looks like." By evening, news programmes across Britain featured the incident, many using witness footage that showed the sequence of events with damning clarity. Military veterans called into radio shows to explain the training and discipline that informed Grimsby's response. Security experts praised the proportional use of force that had neutralised the threat without escalation. The politician's hastily released statement, claiming he had been investigating ceremonial waste when subjected to disproportionate force, was met with immediate contradiction from multiple video angles, showing both his punches and Grimsby's minimal defensive response. What had been planned as a career-reviving moment of boldness had transformed into a career-ending demonstration of poor judgment and dishonesty. For Guard Elliot Grimsby, the incident changed nothing about his duty. He completed his shift with the same unwavering discipline he had demonstrated throughout his service. The small bloodstain on his uniform would be meticulously cleaned that evening, the incident recorded in the official log with military precision and professional detachment. In the days that followed, the incident at Horse Guards Parade became more than just another moment of controversy. It evolved into a powerful reminder that beneath ceremonial traditions lie deeper virtues worth preserving. Guard Elliot Grimsby never sought publicity or gave interviews about what happened. He didn't need to. His actions, the perfect discipline maintained under provocation, The minimal force used in response to aggression, the immediate return to duty afterward, spoke more eloquently than any words could have done. In an age often dominated by those who shout loudest, his quiet dignity resonated with a public weary of empty performance. The politician, by contrast, found his comeback strategy backfiring spectacularly. What he planned as a bold challenge to tradition was widely perceived as a desperate publicity stunt turned assault. The videos capturing his punches made any attempt at reframing the narrative futile. Perhaps the most powerful lesson emerged in the contrast between these two public servants. One who spoke endlessly about serving people while fabricating community projects. Another who stood in silent dedication, embodying values of discipline and responsibility without seeking advantage. What makes traditions endure isn't blind adherence to the past, but the timeless values they often preserve and transmit. When the politician mocked the guard's ceremonial role, he failed to recognize that standing watch, maintaining vigilance with unwavering attention, isn't an outdated concept, but a timeless virtue. The uniform may be historic, but the dedication, discipline, and dignity it represents remain as relevant as ever. If you found this story meaningful, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful reminders of the values that truly matter. Don't forget to hit the bell icon to be notified when we upload new content. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. What does this incident teach us about respecting traditions in an age of viral stunts? Do you think the guard's response was appropriate, or should he have handled it differently? Now, check out the related stories appearing on your screen now, and join us again tomorrow for another powerful look at the guards who stand for something greater than themselves, and the important lessons they continue to teach us all.